Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.
Hello and welcome to Nirmal, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Mr. Srinivasan HR, fondly known as Sri, the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of Take Solutions and a member of the Board of Directors. In fact, he brings 34 years of global management experience. Sri started his career as a civil servant in the Government of India. Post that, he has successfully held several leadership roles, including the Executive Director of the Sriram Group, Managing Director of Semcorp Logistics Singapore, and Managing Director of Temasek Capital Singapore, amongst others. She has been a full-time entrepreneur since 2001. Welcome to the show, Shri, and a pleasure to speak to you as well.
Thank you, Hiral.
Absolutely. Shri, my first question coming to you is, the business that you are in holds utmost important in current times since the time COVID hit us. If you could just help us understand, uh, how was the impact of COVID on your business, negatives as well as positives?
First, we need to understand that the business, the core business that we run, we are a clinical research organization. So we start clinical trials. And then we use the data from that clinical trials that are conducted to get ready market building. As you can understand, this is a contact intensive work. So clinical trials cannot, to the extent that the drug has to be administered and data has to be monitored, has to be done under a controlled setting. And initially, when COVID hit us, the impact was very simple. There were lockdowns, and the lockdowns impacted us in three different ways. First, we could not conduct the clinical trials because the clinics or hospitals where these trials are conducted, that capacity was given for treating the pandemic, and clinical trial was thought of as elective, which is rightly so. The next is patient recruitment was down. Scenario where a pandemic is there. Patients for different disease groups hesitate to come for clinical trials, especially in a hospital setting, and we were impacted by that. The third, most importantly, there is a supply chain of clinical trials which is there, which means have to come, and then they have to be administered, and then the outputs have to be taken for tests to labs. So the supply chain was severely affected. So I think all in all, we went through a situation of having orders and not being able to execute on several of the orders. And you'll also understand that these samples have a shelf life, so they cannot be there for 6 months and 8 months. So some of the samples went out of commission, and these samples had to be ordered with the lockdown finally. So the second part of it is, as we come out of the lockdowns and as we move towards, I would say, the new normal, there are different SOPs that have been formed to deal with how you conduct clinical trials in the pandemic. Because as you would understand, clinical trial is a highly regulated industry. Whatever you do is for the guidelines of the regulator. And once you stop and then you start under pandemic conditions, then the SOPs get overhauled by different regulators. And it takes a lot of time even for the regulator to overhaul. So even a regulatory body like the FDA, it took them almost October, the month of October, to come out with revised SOP. There are several regulators who have still not come out with revised SOP. So you deal with them on a case-by-case basis. So in both these instances, I think the ability to conduct trials in a normal fashion was impacted adversely. The good thing that happened during this time for us on business is that there were a number of COVID trials that came by, and we had the opportunity to be a part of 7 COVID trials.
Mm.
And so that was a new thing where we could engage with different patient population, both in the mild and the intense cases categories, and we could conduct the trials successfully for our clients.
I mean, that sounds really good. So if I have to look at the last 2 quarter numbers as well, we've almost doubled new business wins in the third quarter as compared to the second quarter. Now, do you think this could be a one-off on the back of COVID, or are you expecting this kind of trend to continue?
The new business is there, so yes, because there are newer and newer disease groups, trials need to be conducted.
Correct.
We operate on the demand environment with a bit of tailwind. So the demand environment is certainly big. The RFP activity is almost back to pre-COVID level. And our own success with the COVID trials in the recent past has given us a fillip to get more orders. See, the doubling of the business, I want to tell you, is not on the back of orders alone, it is on the back of our ability to execute. Today, we have a very healthy order book, but what is constrained is our ability to consume the order book, because there are still restrictions that are there. So globally, only about 50 to 60% of the sites have come back to conducting clinical trials. Access to patients is still, while it is far superior to what it was in the month of May or June or July of 2020, access to patients is still constrained. So we have orders to execute, but the operating environment is not yet fully conducive to be operating at full capacity. So as we speak, we are operating at about 60% capacity. That's our capacity utilization.
Right. So Sri, overall, when we're talking of business right now, we did have logistics concerns, overall with regards to where COVID was concerned. From here on, what is the business trend suggesting going ahead?
See, I think it's a positive business trend. So even when we were in Q2, we knew that Q3 was going to be better, and it was. And in Q3, we realized Q4 is going to be better than Q4. It's certainly looking good at this point. But it's very difficult to predict far ahead. I do not think we should assume that there is normalcy every day yet. It's going to be a cautious climb to the normal situation or pre-COVID levels. The reason I say that is that the operating constraints and newer data that is coming before regulators will lead to an overhaul of how clinical trials are conducted and what are the additional checks and balances that need to be taken into the pandemic. It's not definitive yet, and it is evolving. So unless we have the full SOPs laid out by the regulator, it would not be prudent to guess too much into the future and say that 2 quarters from now everything would be normal. I would actually not look at it that way. I would say that this will be a steady but a slow climb back to normalcy.
Correct. And overall, Sri, what's the current capacity utilization, and when do we see the company getting back to pre-COVID levels?
The current capacity utilization is at about 60%. Pre-COVID levels, we were at about 90% capacity utilization. I'm frankly not able to guess when we get back to pre-COVID levels. I will certainly say that Q4 capacity utilization would be closer to about 70%.
Okay.
So we have an improvement from Q3 and Q4. But from there on, we need to take one step at a time, then see how this whole post-pandemic situation pans out.
Right. So, Sri, if I had to understand as to, with the business that you're in current times, this is one of the businesses which is of utmost importance. Then why is it that utilizations drop at current times?
That's because, clinical trials are actually conducted at sites, and these, by the use of the word sites, I mean they're either clinics or hospitals. Most of the capacity in hospitals is still geared towards COVID and COVID treatment. So there are not enough sites that are available for clinical trials. And clinical trial is treated as elective. So if between the choice of conducting clinical trials and treating COVID patients, hospitals are more geared to treating COVID patients. And so we have to accept that fact that the capacity is not available. So that's why it takes a bit more time. And given the fact that there are newer strains that are coming up and there is a surge back of COVID in certain areas, parts of the world, we need to be very cautious in seeing how this will move ahead. So while I'm very optimistic of the way in which things are going, I'd not like to be very aggressive saying that we're bouncing back to normalcy and next quarter is going to be normal. That's not something I'm envisaging.
Right. And then overall, Sri, did we see any cost-cutting initiatives on the back of which, we've seen a positive impact on the margin front, and are you expecting that to continue?
Oh, yes. In fact, when COVID hit us and steep fall in our revenue, I think the first task before the management would see how quickly we can get back to cash positive. And in a scenario where revenue remains uncertain, the only way you can become cash positive quickly is by addressing the costs very significantly. So we took some pretty tough decisions. I think that the workforce substantially, just to deal in terms of our quarterly employment costs, which used to be the region of $29-30 million that is in FY20 per quarter, we've now come down to about $16 million per quarter. So that's nearly halving the wage bill of the company. And we shut down our European operations because we did not envisage that they would become cash positive in the shortest possible time. We had to retain only the businesses that would be able to significantly generate cash quickly and turn around very quickly. So we focus on the US-Asia corridor. So we've taken a number of steps. Obviously, we address SG&A in a significant way. We've cut down the footprint of real estate that we were occupying. So there are several such initiatives that we've taken on the cost side. And we continue to examine what more we can take. But I believe that there is a point beyond which you should not, because it constrains your ability to bounce back. So, like I told you, we are operating at 60% capacity, but we have business for 100% of the capacity. It is our ability to execute that is being constrained at this point of time. And hopefully those constraints would go over. So we've done a massive cost-cutting exercise. We've come back to cash profitability. And we'll continue to stay cash profitable from here on. I don't see that as a challenge as we move ahead.
Right. And how long do you think will we take to get back to pre-COVID levels if you have to look at from a top-line perspective?
I would not be able to, I'd hesitate to answer that question because as we continue to be optimistic, it's very difficult to give a guidance basis what is going on. I think our guidance would be more, I can predict about what would happen in the next quarter. So I know that one of FY22 will be better than Q4 of FY21. But we have to take it as it comes. But I'd say we should be prepared for a slow climb, maybe 2 years, probably full normalcy being restored.
Right. So from here on, if you talk about COVID, that's something which has brought an impetus with regards to digital transition. How are we as a company going to benefit from the same? And do you see any change in terms of business strategy as well?
Yeah, so there are two parts to the question. One, I think we were quite prepared for the cause from a technology company to a CRO. within the take framework has always been very strong. And we had the capability to do several things in a remote fashion. And now we've actually had the opportunity to demonstrate. So when we did our COVID trials for many of our clients, we were doing in geographies where we had no physical presence. So we only connected through the hospital networks to the patients, and we were able to conduct, let us say, semi-virtual trials, if you will. And so the technology architecture to be able to do that is already available in the system. And now we've had the opportunity to prove that and say that it works quite well. So as we move forward, I think client corporations and other agencies like hospitals will be more willing to use digital platforms for executing some of the work, especially with reference to monitoring or using real world evidence data for clinical trials to bring drugs faster, cheaper, better. I think these are areas that are going to become revised industry norms. In the past, most of the innovative drugs that were launched, companies would do trials in 25, 30 countries across a variety of stratified populations. Now there is a strong move, even on the part of regulators, to see that these trials are restricted to 4 or 5 countries. And then after that, real world evidence is used in filing of approvals. So we see the digital platforms becoming very important in doing this. And we also see a scenario where the time and the cost that is taken to do clinical trials will come down. With that being the macro theme, obviously we've had a change in strategy at our level. We've become more nimble in terms of work. And we are also now understanding that we will not commit to a very high fixed cost model, which is the need of the hour. So we'll be very low on fixed costs. We will try to use partner networks as much as possible to keep our fixed costs down. And we will also be a capex light and an asset light company as we move forward. Because the landscape of clinical trials is going to change. And unless you can predict how it is going to be there, you don't want to commit capex. So in the next few years, you should see us as a very asset-like, capex-like, and a very nimble company that relies on low fixed costs and then build a business as we go. This is the marked departure to what it was in the pre-COVID level. But obviously, it's not a on-off switch. So when you do a transition, it takes a bit of time to do that transition. So you can't do these kind of transitions in 1 quarter or 2 quarters. It takes a year and a half before you do the transition. And I think we are doing an excellent job.
Absolutely. I think the transition will always take some time to bear results. Now, with this, what are the kind of client additions that we should be looking forward to over the next 3 to 6 months?
So first, I think we are having first 90% of our business is repeat business. The same set of clients buying more and more services for us. So if we are present in a campus where we were doing just one trial, now we are present in campuses where we trial. If we were doing only regulatory, now we are doing regulatory and pharmacovigilance, or we are adding clinical in the areas where we were only regulatory, or we are adding our regulatory capabilities. So cross-selling of our own services in existing client campuses has occupied a lot of importance this time. We are also seeing a lot of smart addition to clients, especially in the 505(b)(2) of the approval pathway that they are saying. So there are a lot of specialty pharma companies that are involved in novel drugs that are coming to the market. And we've been able to add quite a few during the pandemic year. So I still want to call out that a majority of our business will continue to come from our existing clients. So while new client logo is very important, expanding our market share within existing clients is going to be a driver growth forward. And I'm happy to say that several of the top 10 pharma that who are clients of ours during this period have expanded their business with us. And we should be very comfortable on business development and the development of the order book. What we only need to watch out is how quickly we are able to convert that order book to revenue, which is more a function of how the SOPs fall in place and how quickly we are able to burn the orders.
Right. So from here on, if you have to take business into two segments, say services and the clinical side, what is the current breakup in terms of contribution to revenues, and how do you see it moving over the next 2 to 3 years?
Currently, the phase 2, phase 3 trials and the phase 1 trials that we study, which are the core clinical, they contribute about a little over 50% of our current revenue. But as we move ahead, I think in a 3-year time frame, this business will be 70% of our revenue. The reason for this transition is we started more on the regulatory and the pharmacovigilance side. We added clinical as a capability to us only in 2015 or early 2016. And then we've grown on. But the spend, absolute spend that companies make in the clinical segment is very high. So if there is $1 that is being spent on pharma R&D, 70 cents goes to the clinical part. And I estimate that our revenue will reflect that 2 to 3 years from now, will be predominantly clinical.
Right. And overall, what would the debt repayment plans be of the company, or are we comfortable right now at the current debt to equity ratio?
No, we are not comfortable at the current debt to equity ratio. Having said that, the company has the ability to service this debt completely from current cash. And during the course of the current financial year, we have already repaid about $6 million of principal as well. But going forward, I think this level of debt is not good for us. And so we are in the process of trying to see how to delever the company to some extent. Obviously, it can't be done only with cash flows that come from operations. So we will need fresh capital in delever. However, we are not going to do that at the RISCO level, at the Take Solutions level. We're trying to raise money at an underlying asset level by small divestments of some of our underlying assets, and then use that money to repay the debt. So our goal is that we would like to typically halve the debt in FY22 at least. And then I think we will be at a very comfortable level.
Right. And from here on, with regards to expansion as well, what would your plans be? Because I understand you're planning to go asset light, capex light. So what are the expansion plans? And do you think there could be a fundraising that could be required where we would be raising money from the FI side?
So first on expansion plan, I think it's very important for us to get back to capacity utilization. And that will, as I called out, will climb up slowly and steadily. But we are not going to be investing, expanding anything further than in utilizing our existing capacity. There will be no fundraise at the Take Solutions listed company level. So only fund we require is to deleverage, and that we'll be doing at an underlying asset level. We don't intend to raise funds at the Take.
Right. And overall, what would the growth outlook be for the next 2 years if you have to talk in number terms?
I will not be able to address this question because we need to go see.
Correct. I understand.
But I think to venture out and give a percentage of revenue growth would not be good at this.
I understand, Shri. All right. Thanks a lot, Sri, for joining us on the show. Pleasure speaking to you. Good luck for the coming quarters as well, and hoping to see everyone stand back on their feet to pre-COVID levels pretty soon, because I think everyone's struggling under the same boat.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and good luck and stay safe.